Welcome to Lead Today with me, Kalyna. Let's talk leadership. Hello and welcome back. Bear with me today. I am just dealing with something going on, so I sound a little different, but the show must go on, as they say. So here we are, and this one's important, so we're going to absolutely dive in. It's a continuation on the discussion we were having in the last episode, so if you didn't hear it, I recommend you go back and listen. Sort of a three or two-part series. Today, we're going to discuss how you get your needs across. So in the last conversation, we were talking about really making sure that you're not... So there's the discussion on not being defensive, then there's the discussion on, okay, you're not defensive, but how do you make sure that you're not taken advantage of, right? Or just stomped all over, which was the last conversation. And today we're talking about, okay, but I have needs, right? So it's like you don't get defensive. You are not just allowing someone to treat you poorly, but now you have things to say as well. How do you convey what you need and what you think without making the other person defensive and ensuring that they actually hear you? Because communication, I think it's very easy to forget, but communication at the end of the day is for your audience, right? If you're journaling, if you're speaking to yourself, doing a voice note, for example, if it's for you and you alone, then you can express. And that to me is actually art or creativity, is when you might show it to an audience when you're done with it, but frankly, it's for your own self-expression. It's not for anyone else. In that case, you don't have to moderate. You don't have to think about how you're saying it, what you're saying, because the intent is to express. There's a difference between expression and venting and actually being in conversation, right? So we need to get very clear before we even go to the other person, hey, what do I want to get across to this person? Because when you just go heat of the moment, start criticizing them, or you just start telling them everything that's wrong, you're going to get a suboptimal reaction from them, which makes sense, right? I mean, how could someone respond favorably if you come at them with everything that's wrong? Of course, they're going to be either defensive or feel like they have to fix it or feel put off by it. So this is not to say you can't have uncomfortable feelings and that you can't just share unfiltered. You can. That being said, you maybe want to preface the discussion with the person by saying, hey, I just need to share how I feel, or I'm feeling really off. Can I have, is this a good time for me to spend 10-15 minutes just getting stuff off my chest? I really need to get things off my chest. So if you can give a bit of a disclaimer, prep the person a little bit for what it is they're going to hear, you'll be much better off than just laying it out there. Now, there are days when you won't have that self-restraint, and that's called being human, and our emotions do get the best of us. So I'm not here to say, oh, you have to be this robotic, perfectly behaved individual. That's not life. There will be times when things get the best of you. We're talking about ideal. We're talking about how to aim at what you want to be, your ideal self, as people say, or just that most optimal scenario for communication when something's going on that's challenging you. Okay, so I want to be clear. This is not like this is what it has to be or some textbook definition. We're going to iterate on how you do this in your day-to-day life, and then being very kind with yourself about the fact that you might not do it every time, and that's okay too. So let's say you're in the conversation from last time where, this person came to you with needs, you talked about it, they were in an elevated state, you diffused the scenario, now you're back at the table, or maybe this is just a fresh out the blue. It doesn't really matter, because you're coming back to the table or you're starting something about, hey, something bugs me, right? Like I have needs, I have things that I want to communicate, I want to be heard. Like at the foundation, it's I want to be heard. Now, as I said to you, you've got to come up with the intent. So is it, I just want to be heard and I'm not in solution finding mode? I want to say one big thing I've learned in the couples coaching side of things is There is emotional couch talk, which is essentially on the emotional plane. It's more feminine in nature. Or there's the toolbox. That's the problem solving, masculine in nature. What are we going to do about this? And so even that languaging, I mean, that's worth hundreds of dollars of training, to be quite honest with you. Like just that distinction and being able to make it when you're in conversation is so huge, because if you or your partner or whoever you're talking with goes to the point of, okay, here's what we're going to do, or here's how we'll fix this, or here's how you fix this, then you have language to say, hey, I'm not looking for solutions right now. I really want to share how I feel because I want my feelings to be heard. This is how I felt. And how I felt is not about you necessarily. It's not your fault. It's not something that you caused. In nonviolent communication, which I've referenced before, essentially the way that they talk about it is there's a stimulus and then a response, and the response can be feelings. What others do and say is the stimulus, but that's not what causes your feelings, in the sense of you have such a huge breadth of just stories before the situation comes up that makes you feel a certain kind of way, right? And the thing is, that situation did not make you feel that because of the other person. It's all of how you interpret it. That's exactly why at the beginning of this episode, I said you have to set a clear intention for the conversation, because in the same way, you have to be clear that this is about having the other person hear your side, which means they have to understand it, right? Like this is all a case of oftentimes broken telephone, things from your past coming up in the present, people not understanding what you're trying to say, people taking things personally, which then makes them feel attacked, which then makes them not listen to what you're actually saying. So we're trying to avoid that defensive wall. And the way that we do that is really focus on how I feel, right? So I'm sure you've heard it in one way or another about I versus you, right? This like, you're so selfish versus I feel hurt when whatever happens. So we want to focus on I language. We want to first and foremost set the intention of the conversation. Are you looking to just share emotionally about how you feel and have this be heard? Are you looking to share and then brainstorm solutions? Are you just looking for solutions? What are you looking for out of the conversation? Because at work, when you set an agenda for a meeting, you have an ideal outcome. The same goes for if you're going to set up a conversation where, hey, this is about me. And if the person agrees to the intention and then you go off track, you can always bring it back. Whenever you notice, you can always bring it back. This is something I do a lot in coaching, right? Because people will say, hey, today I want to talk about X. And then they start going off about Y, Z, A, B, C. They go everywhere. And it's like, hey, those things are all valid. Today we're talking about this. Unless you want to change direction and we can decide that. But you said you wanted to talk about this. And so your work in a conversation where you want to be heard is to ensure that you're leading the conversation so that you are heard, right? You're the one coming to the table saying, I want to be heard. So it is on you. It's up to you to come up with the agenda, right? So what's the intention? What are you looking to get out of the conversation? What are the things you want to be heard? Once you're heard, then what, right? So it's like, okay, I hear you. You feel hurt when I, don't plan dates, or I go out and I don't call. You feel hurt when whatever, right? I don't text you back, or I leave your message on read, or when I have to do all the cooking for the kids for the week, I feel alone, or I feel hurt, or I feel sad, whatever you feel. Hopefully you can then come up with, what you'd like instead. And maybe you do brainstorm. So instead of taking it personally on your side or theirs and fighting back, right? Which is, I take it personally and then I get defensive and then I have to protect myself and then I fight back. The hope in this conversation is to consider your own needs and feelings first, and then consider the other person's feelings and needs. Because this is about you. This is about sharing what you have to say. You want to have clear ideas of the point of the conversation, keeping on track if things go off track. How do you do that? You're redirecting back to the purpose, right? Hey, you agreed to talk about this. In this conversation, can we stick to this topic? I'm happy to talk about this later, another time, but we agreed we would talk about how we handle the kids after school activities. We agreed that we would talk about, date night. We agreed that we would talk about how I feel about, your work schedule and how it makes me feel. And it's not about blaming anyone, right? It's like, this is about how I feel. And you can just it's not about the subject matter. This is not about what you did. This is about how I feel about what you did. And so it's not on you. And then you go back, consider your own feelings. When I think about your work schedule, I feel hurt because I need help around the house and I'm not sure how to ask for it because you're tired at the end of the day. And I really want to do the best I can and I'm struggling, And the more you make it about yourself, which is interesting, right? Because this is about you wanting to be heard. But often when we want to be heard, we blame the other person and we go into that accusatory, critical mode. So it's funny because we want to feel heard, but we don't actually say what we feel or talk in the I position. So again, that I voice. I feel alone. I'm struggling with this. I feel scared. I feel sad. I feel, put that in your toolbox and that's really if you want to be heard, great. What do you have to say about yourself or about the situation from your perspective? Keep it from your perspective. Keep it on a feelings plane. Keep it on a personal level about yourself. Because that's what's going to keep you from the other person either defending the situation, because it's about feelings, right? I mean, if you want to be heard, it's about feelings, it's about preferences and needs. So you've shared your needs. Now you do get to make a request, right? And this is where you might do a brainstorm, but you do have needs and you don't have to just go straight to the brainstorm. You want to be heard. Hey, I worry about and I feel sad about and I feel nervous about being at home all the time and you're working a lot and your work schedule makes me feel angry and frustrated because I feel alone in the parenting journey. And then a request is requesting what you want. So keeping it in the positive. This is a big, I could do a whole episode on just this one point alone. In coaching, we're very focused on being solution focused and naming things in the positive. That does not mean everything is positive. That means the way that you make a request for something or the way that you state what you want is in the positive. Example, someone comes in, I don't want to be stressed anymore, or I don't want to feel alone anymore, or I don't want to be anxious anymore. I had a client come in and talk about, make a life wheel. I don't want to be anxious. And so they're scaling on not anxious. And we don't want to scale. And when I say scale, I mean a ranking, completely subjective ranking on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, I guess, very anxious, 10 being not anxious. But again, that's not in coaching. We want to focus on move toward language versus move away from language. And so move toward language is, I want to feel more connected with you, or I want to feel more calm, if we say in the spectrum of anxiety to calm, or peace, or the word itself is up to you, but we really want to be careful about stating things in the positive, which to me, the more granular way to look at that is in the move toward type of language, which is where the direction you want to go, because your brain wants to go to calm. Right? If you are moving away from, you're using fear-based motivation, which can be a very strong motivator. The question is, do you want to be motivated by fear your whole life? And that's a whole other episode and a bigger question, and a lot of us are. And rightfully so. There are a lot of scary things in the world, so I'm not here to negate that. But I am here to say, is that what you want to be motivated by in your relationships? Is fear, or even in your relationship with yourself? So, okay, we're going to use move toward language to request what we want. And we're going to say, so move away would be, I don't want you to spend so much time at work, right? Move toward is, I'd like to spend more time with you at home. Or I'd like you to spend more time with me at home. So you're focused on what you want instead of what you don't want. Mainly because our brains actually don't hear the don't, the negation. Our brains have a hard time processing that. They just hear, you spend so much time at work. You say, I don't want you to spend so much time at work. You spend so much time at work. Like, that's what you hear. Your brain kind of catches the tail end of that and goes, well, but I have to spend time at work because I have this and this deadline and there's a lot to do and I'm really busy at work and work's important and we need money and how are we going to pay the bills? But like a good example from my client, it's like, okay, but then my client always gets stuck walking the dog because the other client or the partner is so busy at work that they say that's the reason they can't walk the dog. What a small thing, right? In essence, like if you were to think, wow, someone's coming in and paying you and they're talking about walking the dog, what's going on here? Again, we want to use our emotional toolkit, go under the surface. It's obviously not about walking the dog. I mean, tangibly it is. Like tangibly, you're going to want to request, hey, I'd like to come up with a schedule where we can both manage the dog's walking schedule together. It's our dog, and I'd like to manage and shoulder the responsibilities together. As I said in the other episode, after you express your need, I would highly recommend having that matter-of-fact tone that we've talked about. Not necessarily teacher voice. You're not being quite as assertive as when you're holding your ground if someone's taking advantage or kind of pushing you too far to your limits. But you want to say it matter-of-factly, and then you want to pause. So, hey, I'd like to talk about how I've been feeling, and would that be okay? And it's like, yeah, what's up? Okay, I feel that I get really run down at home, and I often feel really alone, and like things get put on me because I'm always seeing things that have to be done, and I take them on, and that feels really hard, and I feel really alone, and I feel like I have to shoulder a lot of the day-to-day home tasks because I'm the one that's home more, and that feels unfair, and I feel sad, or I feel burnt out, or I feel tired, or whatever. It's like, okay, so what do you want me to do about that? Or, okay, yeah, maybe the other person has the emotional capacity to say, yeah, I can see that, or I can see where you're coming from, or understand, or yeah, I've had times like that too where I feel that way. And so hopefully they can relate with you, or at least acknowledge what you're saying. And if they can't, they're like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, one example is I feel like I often have to take over walking the dog because I'm around, and so I do it. And to some degree, I happily do it. Other times, I do feel really alone. And I feel like I'm not just walking the dog, but I'm alone in having to manage these mundane tasks. And beyond that, I also feel unappreciated. And what I would like is to come up with a schedule so that we can both manage the dog. And I'd also love more acknowledgement. I really thrive on words of affirmation. This is from Dr. Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages. If you haven't heard that episode, highly recommend you listen to that episode of the podcast. So check that out after this episode. But so really being able to speak to, here are my core needs. I like hearing when you say thank you. That means a lot to me. It means that my efforts are appreciated, and I like that. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel loved. That makes me feel seen for my efforts. So the request is not a demand. It's a request. And so you do have to be okay with the person saying no, right? I mean, they might say, you know what, I don't have bandwidth right now to deal with the dog. And you can go back and say, you know, I feel sad hearing that because I feel like it's our shared responsibility. And I feel like I have to shoulder it alone. What can we do? Are there other ways that we can go about this? Whether it's a dog walker or, you know, I mean, now you're going into the weeds a little bit, but if that person says no to your request, you do have to be ready for that. And you do have to have your own set of boundaries clear in your mind about what's okay. So if the person says they're not going to walk the dog, and you can insert anything, right? Whatever request it is, doesn't have to be the dog. But if the person says no to, so you share your needs, you're heard, you've shared what you feel, the person has empathized, or maybe they haven't empathized. If they start getting defensive, you want to de-escalate. You'll notice even micro escalations. I don't know if that's a real word, but I'm going to call it that, because things kind of micro escalate. You'll kind of notice their shoulders going up, the hair on their back is sort of standing, right? Like they're on edge. You're like, yeah, I'm listening and you're saying your needs, but I'm still sort of wary that I'm going to be attacked here, that this is about me. And so you might, if you notice that, and it's subtle, but you might want to take the person's hand or look them in the eye or reassure, hey, this is about my feelings. Because again, it's like, why do I have to care for this person when I'm trying to share my needs? Well, depending on your relationship with the person, if you're rebuilding a relationship, if the other person's emotional intelligence isn't exactly like yours, you know, if their communication style isn't like yours, different cultures can make this the case. It's going to take some iteration. And again, you're communicating to be heard by your audience. And so you have to take your audience into account. You must, if you want to be heard by them. You can say, that's annoying, or I don't want to have to moderate. Well, okay, but that audience might not get your message. And so then what have you done? You haven't actually reached your aim, which is to get your needs and your feelings across and to make your requests and to be on the same page and all of that. Like, that's what communication is for, is to make sure that an apple is an apple and you both know what you're talking about. That's the whole challenge with language, and why I've mentioned backtracking as a skill. If you don't know about it, go back to the last episode, because you have to be able to relate to people on their level to be connected with them. Again, that doesn't mean you don't need a journal, or you don't need a therapist, or you don't need a coach, or you need a place, a safe space where you can express without having to think about how you're saying things. There's some friendships like that. There's some friends that'll say, yeah, lay it on me, and it's great, and you can just share your feelings, and they're that safe space. They know they're just listening. That's why it's easier to talk to friends about your problems when it's not about them, right? Because they're not emotionally triggered by what you're saying. That's why we go to our friends, our family, trusted advisors when things are hard, and we don't keep things inside the marriage, because that's easier. I'm not suggesting it necessarily to go and tell all your friends about your problems and then not build a connection with your significant other. I mean, that's your wife, that's your husband, that's the person that at the end of the day you want to be able to talk things through with. And so if you find yourself running to other people, that's probably why, is because they're going to be that listening ear. Maybe they even take your side, maybe they agree with you, right? Especially if it's the same gender, like two women talking a lot of times, right? I see this often, like two wives talking or two girlfriends or whatever, and it's like, sure, you know, you go and it's like, this is why he's so annoying, and this and this and this and that, and yeah, exactly, he shouldn't do that. And so not only are they a safe space because they're not emotionally attached, because you're not talking about something that really affects them, but then on top of it, they're agreeing with you. So of course, right, we seek out people that agree with our opinions, and we could translate this to just about everything, whether it's politics or it's education, it's, you know, just anything where they're different. I mean, literally any topic, right? Our brain looks out for evidence that corroborates, that agrees with what it is that we're hoping to, what we believe or what we're hoping to prove. And so when you have a problem with your husband, sure, you go to your girlfriend and you say, he said this and this and this, and he never does this, and you're complaining, and the girlfriend's like, oh, men are so useless. Men, absolutely, he should be this and this and this. And you leave the conversation feeling a little bit better because your point has been validated, you've been heard. The challenge is that is not actually solving anything in your situation because you have to go deal with that husband, right? And you have to go connect with, communicate in a way that that person hears you and actually wants to do what it is that you're requesting. And if you vilify them and you go in, and I know I'm saying you, and I'm kind of coming at you here if you do this, and guess what? I've done it. So this is not like, oh, don't do this. And nothing about the show ever is because usually it's because I've done the thing. And so I can come in here and I can say, hey, I've done it. It doesn't work as well as this. And that's why I'm giving tools that I think work better than the conventional tools that most people use. So that's not because I haven't done it. I've done it. I've called people and complained, and it does feel temporarily good. And then you know what? You're still in your situation. And maybe that girlfriend gives you advice, right? And says, oh, tell him this and this, or tell him, and you try it out. One, most people don't actually follow other people's advice. So even in this show, right? Like you might listen to this, hopefully you're willing to test it out. But you've got it. The proof is always in the pudding. I can tell you things work. Hopefully you test them out, but you're only really going to believe it when you see that it works from your own experience, right? So same thing. Someone gives you advice. If they give it to you and it works, okay, you're happy in that moment. If they give you advice and it doesn't work, you're not taking full responsibility and you're blaming them. So we're going a little bit down the rabbit hole, but just to say there are coping mechanisms with relationships where we go outside of the relationship. And if that's what you want to do, I totally understand it. That being said, it's not addressing the problem or the feeling with the person who's involved. And so one, that's why it's not as emotionally charged. But two, you're not building the connection and finding the solution with the person who you actually need to find that solution with. So just bear that in mind, right? That you will need to go to the person who's involved. And that's why they get kind of heated, because it is about them. It's not their fault. Your feelings are your feelings, but it is involving them. And so they do feel a higher stake in it. And that's why there can be those micro escalations within a conversation. And that is why if you're going to the person involved, hopefully you have had a bit of time to journal or think about it or mull it over and can go to them from a place of, this is how I'm feeling, this is what happens, this is what I'm requesting from, that I would like to spend more time with you, I'd like to set up a schedule about the dog. And then hopefully the other person hears you out. Again, if they don't, fair enough. Fair enough, right? You can make a request. They do not have to listen or agree or comply. So you just want to make sure, and there's a really good website that I'll share, but you want to make sure that you've shared your need. First and foremost, you've shared the intention of the call or the conversation. Then you shared the need. Have you done this in a cooperative tone? Like, are you keeping check out for those micro escalations? Make sure you're coming back to, hey, I'm wanting to share about how I feel. I'm not blaming you. The tone has to keep that cooperative tone. This is not assertive teacher voice. This is that cooperative, emotional, friendly tone. Make sure that the dialogue is in short chunks. Another thing that gets in people's way a lot of times is one person goes on a monologue, and oftentimes, a person will check out. You have to kind of pause, ask them what they think, ask them, if the plan of action, if that request, if it's reasonable, if you are coming up with ideas about how to go about the request of, let's say, making that shared schedule for the dog. Make sure that the plan of action responds to the concerns of both sides. So you do have to take into account the partner's work schedule, right? It's like, hey, I want to share this responsibility with you. I totally understand that, Monday through Friday is tough. So is there a time of day, Monday through Friday, that works best? Can you take weekends? Like we can talk about this, but make sure that the plan of action to resolve the dog thing, first of all, make sure you stay on track with the dog. If that's what you're talking about, is walking the dog, make sure you stay on track. And then that plan of action corresponds to the intention. And then you're reviewing the plan to make sure everybody's on board, right? Hey, do we both understand what we're committing to? And then at the end, one really good question to just make sure you've hit all the points is, and one way to do this is a closed-ended question, which I've seen recommended with nonviolent communication. Are there any things we've missed here? Anything that feels unfinished? The challenge with that for me as a coach is it's like yes or no. And if it's yes, great, and hopefully they elaborate. But if it's no, there could still be a little piece of something, but they just want the conversation to end. So are there any little pieces of this that feel unfinished? Maybe you'll get the answer out of that. But you might also say something like, how complete do you feel with this discussion? And they can say, okay, I feel complete. Everything's good. Or they could say, this still lingers. So, semantics, but you might want to make it an open-ended question, which means not a yes or no answer. But at the end, you will want to just check in. Hey, have we covered what we were aiming to cover? How are you feeling about this? And hopefully both people feel resolved with the situation. So I will link to the nonviolent communication, a really good guide, some activities. There are role plays you can do with nonviolent communication to practice, whether in dyads or in groups or one-on-one, and just practicing that empathetic tone. There's so much that you can do with just nonviolent communication alone. It's such a big body of work. Let me see I know that it was developed by Marshall Rosenberg. Don't have a year for you. Sorry. But really we're aiming at compassion, and that's compassion for you and your partner or the other person at the table. And I'll link those, both the couple of spreadsheets and you might need a checklist the first time you tried this with your partner. It's like, wait, what are we doing here? And maybe if you're new to it and they're new to it, it's actually less intimidating, right? It's like, hey, let's give this a try. Let's see how this goes. And so hopefully that brings you together on this as well. It's like, hey, there's this new approach I want to try. I want us to both feel like we're heard and on the same page. And, would you be willing to try it with me? If you get the buy-in, great. Test it out with one of the templates, and maybe that'll bring you closer too. I hope this was useful. If you have more questions, send them in. As the template says, are any little pieces of this do any little pieces of this still feel unfinished for you? So if this feels like there's more to be said, which there's always more to be said, please send me a note. We can talk more on it. I can talk more on it and explain further. Again, nonviolent communication is such a big body of work with lots of tools. So I'll also share some resources for you to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further. If you like this episode or this show, please do like, review, share, subscribe. Take action to interact with the show online. That's what allows more people to see it. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm really grateful for your continued presence and suggestions, interacting with the show. It means everything to me. It's why I make the show. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. It really helps the show when you like, review, subscribe, or donate to support the effort to continue producing amazing episodes just like this one. I look forward to seeing you again in another episode very soon, and take good care until then.